First of all, I have to say how wonderful it is to be back. Really, it's been all of the various trips. You've been with me every step of the way. I've been thinking about our parish and the great friendships and the great people we have here. Even though I encountered other great people, there was a real hole in my heart until I got back. And it's really wonderful to be here again. But I come back at an interesting time. The feast of Christ the King. Endings. It's the end of ordinary time. It's the end of the whole liturgical year. Next Sunday we'll be wishing everybody Happy New Year as we start with Advent. Or as Father Roy reminded us last weekend, the shopping season. Endings and new beginnings. That's where we find ourselves this weekend. You know, last week we encountered the 50th anniversary of the assassination of John Kennedy. And I'm sure for many of us that was a time of great reflection. I hope it was. 50 years since that awful day in Dallas, which ended his life, and some would say changed our country forever. An ending. And yet now we have a new beginning. We have a new start. Because also last week, Diane and I got to celebrate the birth of our 10th and 11th grandchild. Twins. And the second twin, delayed coming so far, she has her own birthday. So it was a strange week, remembering an ending and celebrating a new beginning. This feast that we celebrate is one of the newest feasts on our calendar. You know, the oldest Christian feast was Easter. As those early Christians remembered that day when Christ transcends death and returns to the Almighty Father. And then came Lent, as people tried to prepare for Easter. And then Christmas, the whole mystery of the Incarnation. But this feast of the kingship of Christ didn't come about until 1925. 1925. The Pope was a man named Pius XI. And what was he seeing in the world? What he was seeing was the rise of totalitarian governments. Communism. Fascism was about to take off. Soon it would be Nazism. All of the martyrdoms going on in Mexico. All of this violence and abusive power by civil authority. And the Pope said we need to remind ourselves that the model of kingship, of rule, is the model shown to us by Christ. I hope it was somewhat shocking tonight to realize that the gospel was from Christ speaking from his throne on the cross. That's normally what we read during Holy Week. But now we read it as we celebrate the kingship of Christ. How does Christ exercise his kingship? And here we find a very interesting lesson. There are many types of power that we can talk about. Unfortunately for us in English, we've only got the one word, power. And often it's associated with coercive power, or abusive power, or I don't have electricity power. But for the Greeks, in which language that gospel was first written, they had three different words for power. There was the power we associate with energy. There was the power we associate with the creation of energy. If you think of dynamite, comes from one of those words. Creates the energy of the explosion. But then there's a third word. And every time power is associated with Jesus Christ, the Greeks used the third word, which literally means to go out of himself. He exercised a power that left his self behind and he went out. He gave of himself. Look what he does on the cross with the good thief. He's hanging there in agony, about to die. And this man asks him for a favor. And what does Jesus do? Today, you'll be with me in paradise. We realize that the exercise of power by our God is a self-giving power. It's a power that is never abusive or coercive, unlike the many models we see around us far too often. Our God is a God who, Father Roy reminded us last week, walks with us, is with us. Our God doesn't just stay in heaven. Our God has joined with us in our own joys and sufferings and heartaches and pains. Our God is here with us, suffering with us, rejoicing with us. And that's the way his power is exercised. Always healing, always compassionate, always seeking justice. So as we honor that kingship of Christ, may we also remember the responsibility that we share. We are about to celebrate a baptism. And in a little bit, I'm going to pour a whole bunch of oil on this young lady's head. And then the prayer that goes with it, we're going to talk about Christ as priest and prophet and king. Every one of us who has been baptized has been anointed king and priest and prophet. And so therefore we are called to exercise our share of that kingship in the same way Christ did, by pouring ourselves out for others, sacrificing everything and sometimes maybe even our lives to care for others. That's the lesson of this feast, to rule as Christ ruled, to be servant and shepherd king as Christ was.